Welcome to Reinventing-U. I'm your host, Danielle Silverman. I believe that in today's world of ever-constant evolution, the only career change that matters is when what you do matches who you are and what you believe. This show is where you'll learn how embracing change and reinventing yourself will help you navigate any disruptions and lead a life of happiness and fulfillment, especially in this ever-changing world. Your purpose and your meaning will drive your personal transformation. As I like to say, it's your vision, your life. Be passionate about it. Reinventing-U starts now. Welcome, everyone. I'm Danielle Silverman. You're listening to Reinventing-U on Transformation Talk Radio, a show about what it means to pursue a career and a life that corresponds to who you are, to help you find your purpose and to live it. If you'd like to learn more about what that means and what I do, I invite you to visit my website at www.reinventing-u.com and book a free session with me. So, we've talked so far about the state of work today, about the Great Resignation, quiet quitting, and how the psychological contract at work is broken. If you're one of the many who are quietly quitting your job, how do you fall back in love with it? And if you have quit your job, how do you find one that's right for you in this volatile and uncertain world? These are the topics we'll discuss today in this episode of Reinventing-U. You're going to want to hang on to your seat today because I'm going to be sharing a lot of information with you. So if it sometimes feels like you're drinking from a fire hose, well, please don't panic. I'll try to break things down for you. And you can always contact me if you want to know more or if there's something that's not clear. So feel free to book a free consult with me directly in my calendar at www.calendly.com/Danielle-Silverman. So let's begin. What does it mean to you to reinvent yourself and live life your way? It's a crucial question to ask yourself, one we're going to explore in great detail if you work with me. How do you fall back in love with your job? How do you find a job that you will love? I'm going to attempt to answer both of these questions by talking about some of the things that will prepare you to be in that state of joy and fulfillment. In essence, it's about who you are. The second part of my statement, when what you do matches who you are. I'll be talking about some very simple things that you can do to make your life better when you find yourself in a turbulent situation. You probably know many of these already, but it's never a bad thing to review them and maybe to go into them into a little bit more depth. Let's start by going back to the way things currently are. One of the things I've been talking about is if you're quiet quitting, take a step back and try to figure out what's going on. If you don't know what quiet quitting is, or if you missed the podcast about quiet quitting, it's about staying in your job, but doing just the bare minimum that is expected of you. Nothing more, not working overtime, not being creative or coming up with new ideas, really just doing what's expected of you. But the problem with that is that you're almost just taking a back seat, and I'm convinced that if you're quiet quitting, you're not happy in your job. You're overwhelmed with too much work that you're being asked to do. That's why you're quiet quitting. You've got too many meetings, too much overtime, or maybe you've got tasks that you're being given tasks that are not directly related to your job description. You're understandably upset, tired, angry, overwhelmed. I could go on. You quiet quit. The first thing to do is to consider, just consider, that you might be going through burnout. We talk about that a lot. You hear burnout everywhere. You read it in articles everywhere. But do we actually know what it means? See, burnout is not a medical condition. Or according to the American Psychological Association, according to their Dictionary of Psychology, burnout is defined as a physical, emotional, or mental exhaustion accompanied by decreased motivation, lowered performance, and negative attitudes towards oneself and others. Negative attitudes towards oneself and to others. In the 1970s, a US psychologist, Professor Christina Maslach and Professor Herbert Freudenberger, I hope I pronounced their names right, they independently identified some of the occupational hazards that are endured by people working in human services and in the caregiving professions. The interesting thing is that that's where it was first discovered, but right now it's exploded into all of the professions and all kinds of services that we see. It doesn't matter whether you're working in human services or as a caregiver, a nurse, for example. But if you're working in marketing, the same thing is happening. If you're working in finance, the same thing is happening. If you're working in industry of some kind, in manufacturing or in pharmaceuticals or whatever the case may be, it's happening. So these professors didn't call it burnout at first, but it was the beginning of a growing interest in workplace-related stress. And that's extended beyond day-to-day difficulties. Today, we view burnout as a consequence of chronic work stress over an extended period of time. Burnout is a consequence of chronic work stress over extended periods of time, which is exactly what's been happening to us for the past 3 years, or perhaps beyond, and what is continuing to happen. According to Dr. Maslach, burnout has 3 components. The first is emotional exhaustion. So feeling tired, feeling drained, frustrated, fatigued. If you're feeling that at work, take note of it. You work elsewhere because you're feeling it in general, emotional exhaustion, tiredness, you're feeling drained, frustrated, fatigued. Cynicism or detachment is another component. So what does that mean? Negative attitudes towards coworkers, towards clients, towards the work itself. And that leads to a withdrawal from professional obligations. It leads to irritability. It leads to a loss of idealism, a loss of belief in something greater. And I believe that quiet quitting is one such form of detachment. The third component is inefficiency, because all of this leads to reduced productivity, leads to low morale, leads to an inability to cope. And at the same time, it causes a sense of loss of accomplishment and even a loss of personal identity. You begin to question who you are. So burnout is a definite possibility if you're in quiet quitting. Some experts think that other conditions, like depression, are behind burnout. And other researchers point out that there are individual factors, such as personality traits and family life, that can also influence who experiences burnout. Most organizations, in fact, almost everyone, even ourselves, we tend to blame ourselves for having reached a state of burnout. Yeah, there are some things we can do to help ourselves avoid burnout, and I'm going to cover those. But let's not forget that some part of the responsibility lies with the organization. After all, bottom line, job burnout is a special kind of work-related stress. We can't disregard the fact that the work environment or the culture of the organization may also be contributing. Think about poor working environments or hostile work cultures, unreasonable work expectations, ineffective leadership sometimes, or problematic work values. Research has shown that both the work environment characteristics and individual characteristics were responsible for burnout outcomes. Burnout is therefore a shared responsibility of the individual and the organization and the work culture. Even if your work environment is not deliberately exploitative, there are still factors that contribute to that contribute to burnout. They both end in out, so, and you can get burnt out by working out too much too. In today's world of staff shortages and the chaos caused by the pandemic, hybrid work, remote work, a slew of other practices that are new to leadership who are struggling themselves to figure out how to deal with these things and these new ways of working. As a result of all of that, more than ever, we're seeing excessive workloads. We're seeing lack of flexibility in schedules. We're seeing lack of autonomy in the workers, in the employees themselves. We're seeing some destructive competition among coworkers. Maybe you're seeing yourself getting shut out of opportunities. I've spoken to many, many people who say to me, I went into this job thinking there would be opportunities, and I keep applying for those opportunities and they're being denied me. That's an example of getting shut out of opportunities, very probably because the organization itself doesn't really understand what is needed in the moment. It may not be their fault, but the problem is it's still happening. Or there could be loss of a shared common meaning and purpose at work. Are you in a job perhaps where you're feeling that you're not construed as having meaningful input into what you're doing, and you're not a meaningful change agent, or you're simply not being asked for your opinion? And sometimes, sadly, sometimes for many people, fear is the primary experience of work. Perhaps they're being bullied. There is some harassment at work, or there is some drive, not drive, but being asked for a drive to perform that is beyond reasonable and that therefore causes some fear. Or else there is self-sacrifice. It's promoted as a model of work. You're expected to work overtime. You're expected to go to that special meeting outside of work hours. You're expected to work weekends. You're expected to sacrifice yourself so that the organization can succeed. We need to question these. Sometimes there are inefficiencies in the workplace. We've always done it this way. How many times have you heard that? Don't rock the boat. How many times have you heard that? Inefficiencies are derived from those statements. Just because you've always done it this way doesn't mean it's the right way to do it anymore. Not in today's world. Not with all of the changes that are going on. It just doesn't work. And you see, burnout today is so common that it's seen simply like business as usual. Oh, well, this person is not showing up for the next month. Their doctor has written a note. They need to take a break. It's a sad world. But as I said before, not everything on this list is your responsibility necessarily, not necessarily the responsibility of the individual. Whatever the cause, you know that job burnout can affect your physical and mental health. So consider figuring out if what you're doing or what you're going through is job burnout, or is it something else? So I talked about depression as well as a possible consideration before. What's the difference? Well, like burnout, depression is characterized by fatigue, lack of interest in activities you once enjoyed, and a host of other physical symptoms. But the main difference, according to experts, is that in depression, symptoms persist, even if you're taking a break from your stressors. That's the difference. So if you're in a burnout, for example, and you take a break, taking that break will be healthy for you. It will be good for you. But if you're in depression, whether you take that break or not, you're still going to be in depression. And to be diagnosed with depression, you really do need to consult with a physician. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, if you feel any of the following symptoms nearly every day or over the course of 2 weeks or more, actually, if you feel the symptoms every day over the course of 2 weeks or more, you may be suffering from depression. And these symptoms are persistent, sad, anxious, or what we call empty mood. You feel numb, basically. Feelings of hopelessness or pessimism, irritability, feelings of guilt, worthlessness or helplessness, loss of interest or pleasure in hobbies and activities, decreased energy or fatigue, moving or talking more slowly, restlessness, having trouble sitting still. No, I'm not depressed, but I'm just illustrating it for you. Are you having difficulty concentrating, remembering, or making decisions? Are you having difficulty sleeping? Are you having difficulty waking up in the morning? Or do you oversleep? Have you noticed appetite or weight changes, or both? Have you had thoughts of death or suicidal attempts? Do you have aches or pains, headaches, cramps, digestive problems without a clear physical cause that fail to ease these, even with treatment? All of these symptoms that you may experience every day over a period of 2 weeks are a sign of depression. Varying degrees, minor, medium, major, but they are signs of depression and need to be looked at right away. Your job may be one cause of these symptoms, but there may be other things at play as well. So if you recognized any of these symptoms in yourself, I urge you to consult a doctor right away. I remember when I was going through a difficult time at work. I talked to a friend of mine who then referred me to a coach she knew. And I met with that coach. And after just a few minutes of listening to me, She asked me when the last time was I'd seen my doctor. It had been some time. So the next day I called my doctor. And when I couldn't get an appointment right away, I broke down in tears. From simply getting a no, you can't have an appointment right away, I broke down in tears. For me, that was the first sign that something was actually really wrong. But I was lucky. The receptionist recognized what was going on, and she did give me an appointment for the next morning. And that afternoon, I was seeing a psychologist who diagnosed me with work-related stress and burnout and major depression. Wham! All things rolled into one. I didn't go back to work the next day. In fact, I didn't go back to work for the next 2 years. That's how bad it was. And I don't wish that on you. One of my goals, in addition to helping you reinvent yourself, is to help you nip this kind of situation in the bud before it becomes serious. Okay. So maybe you're quiet quitting because you don't agree with what's going on in your workplace. Maybe it's something else. It's worth your time finding out, figuring it out. And once you've figured that out, we can talk about what to do. There's no doubt in my mind that self-care should be your number one priority. So first figure out whether you really are in burnout or whether there's something else going on with you. Is it something about the workplace? And I'm going to talk a little bit later on about some of the things that you can do in these situations. But it's worth figuring it out. So self-care is your number one priority. And it's very difficult for a lot of people, myself included. Self-care, not necessarily to recover from burnout, but to avoid burnout, to enhance your health, not just to maintain it, but to be in top form so that you can live your best life, one that's anchored in who you are and what you value. So if you do find that you're in burnout, there are some immediate things you can do. The most important are to focus on the basics, really the very basics. I was speaking with a client just a couple of days ago, and he was amazed at how simple some of these suggestions were, and yet how truly powerful they are. And he went, oh my gosh, how come I didn't think of that? These are the very basics and the basis of self-care. Things that are absolutely critical in the reinvention process. Because if you don't take care of yourself first, you cannot be flexible enough to face the changes that are going on in the world today. Just as when you're in a plane and there's a loss of pressure in the cabin, a mask drops down from the ceiling and you're told to put the mask on yourself first as the most important thing to do. Why? Because if you're not well, you can't help others. In this case, if you're not well, you won't be able to help yourself. So, self-care, number one. Make sure you're getting enough sleep and that the quality of your sleep is good. You'd be surprised at how important that is. I got a new puppy. You saw him in my first podcast episode. And I used to, have him in a crate overnight. But he would get up very early in the morning, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. And I'm not an early morning person. And I realized, one morning what happened is he barked so much that the neighbors complained. So I decided, okay, I'm going to try something else. And I put a diaper on him and let him sleep in my bed. Well, you know what happened? I was able to sleep in. And lo and behold, I realized how stressed I was because at anticipating having to wake up early, maybe even earlier, because he used to wake up at 6:30, and then all of a sudden he started waking up at 5. And so my body was not relaxed during sleep because I was unconsciously anticipating the fact that I would have to get up really, really early. Once I solved that issue, oh my goodness, my mood changed. Everything changed. Poor sleep not only affects your mood, it weakens your immune system. It makes you at a higher risk of getting sick or contracting serious illnesses like diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, stroke. And lack of sleep and poor quality sleep can also cause weight gain. I know something about that. It can cause low sex drive. It can cause memory issues. It can cause trouble with thinking and concentration. Pretty basic. The common things that promote good sleep quality, you're not going to like to hear this. Avoiding screen time at least 1 hour before going to bed. That's a tough one. I deliberately have a television in another room, not in my bedroom, because I know that I will watch it in bed. What else? Going to bed at the same time every night. Making sure your surroundings are conducive to a good night's sleep. In other words, do you have a blackout curtain? If you have trouble falling asleep, try listening to a story. I frequently listen to a recording of Dr. Clarissa Piccola Estes reading the Chronicles of Narnia. Beautiful. She has a lovely voice. It's like listening to a bedtime story. I've never made it through the entire story. You can also do some deep breathing exercises or a body scan to relax your body and prepare yourself for sleep. And you can find many, many of these solutions for free on YouTube or in one of a multitude of apps that are available. Yes, I know. I said avoid screen time and listening to YouTube or listening to a bedtime story. It's not about looking, because the issue is the light coming into your eyes. It's about listening. And listening to a soothing voice is relaxing. What's the number 2 thing you can do for self-care, in addition to good sleeping habits? Diet and exercise are also very important. Having a healthy diet with less fat and carbohydrates will help immensely, as will drinking plenty of water during the day. Think Mediterranean diet. I know keto is popular and intermittent fasting is also very popular. Believe me, I've been through so many fad diets in my life, I don't have enough fingers on my hands to count them all. I've done keto. I've done intermittent fasting. Some of them do work for a time. And yes, different things work for different people. Absolutely. So find something that's good for you. I'm not talking about weight loss here. I'm talking about staying healthy so that you can withstand the stressors of life. In my opinion, the best thing for that is a Mediterranean diet. It might be different for you, and that's okay. Remember, I'm not talking about weight loss. I'm talking about staying healthy. Exercise is also very important. I know you've heard of the many benefits of exercise on mental health. It's been known to reduce mild or moderate depression, anxiety, stress, even symptoms of ADHD or PTSD and trauma, in fact. But I get it. Not everyone likes exercise. I think it's because we have a fixed idea in our head of what it's supposed to be, running a mile every day or working weights in the gym. Sure, if that's what you enjoy, absolutely do it. But if you don't enjoy, then what do you do? Well, find out what you enjoy. Try different things until you find that one thing that you can do on a regular basis without it adding stress to your life, because it's something you think you have to do or that you should do. You should do it because you enjoy it, not because you have to. So it could be walking your dog, playing tennis, doing yoga, or Tai Chi, or Taekwondo, or Krav Maga, or ping pong. It doesn't matter what you do. It matters that you enjoy it enough to do it. I personally like swimming. And I'm lucky enough to have a pool in my building. I have friends who like to hike or go bike riding, others who run marathons or go sailing. Whatever floats your boat. Pun intended. Okay. What else is there? If you're really in a bad posture, take a break, go on vacation, or take a leave of absence. Take time away from work so that you can relax, de-stress, and reassess. Reassess. What does that mean? Maybe it's time for you to think about what your goals are in life. Not just your goals, but your values as well. Take time to think about what would bring meaning into your life. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. Wake up every morning and think about one thing you could do that day that would bring you joy. And once you've considered what your personal motivations are, you could begin to think about what you could be doing to bring more life into your job. Here's some ideas. Think about what originally drew you to the job in the first place. When was the last time you enjoyed what you were doing? What was it precisely you were doing that brought you joy? Don't dwell on what's not working now. While that is important, it's more important to think about what changes you could make that would help make your work more palatable. That could be as simple as collaborating with a team member, reviewing how you do things. How do you prepare for meetings, for example? Another thing it's important to understand is not to take on any extra responsibilities or commitments if you're in a burnout situation. Learning how to say no is important, whether you're in burnout or not. And it's a challenge for many of us, myself included. If you want to find yourself wanting to say yes, ask yourself the following questions. Do I have time for it? In other words, is it urgent or important? Am I the right person for the task? Or is somebody else better suited? No egos here. Very often we're caught up in, oh, I'm the only person who can do this. Oh, they asked me. Isn't that wonderful? Am I the right person for the task? Does this request fit in with my goals and my priorities? If you answered no to any of these questions, that remember that you're saying no to the task. You're not saying no to the person. Saying no is about putting yourself first. Remember the oxygen mask on the plane. You put yourself first. And finally, practice some positive thinking. Because I said earlier, burnout can lead you into a cycle of negative thinking. So it's important to recognize when that's happening, because it can get worse over time. All of these strategies can bring more joy into your life. And bringing more joy into your life is an example of positive action. So positive thinking is about deliberately thinking or visualizing positive thoughts or writing them down. I know many people who consistently write down positive affirmations or have them on sticky notes that they put in different places around the house as a reminder. If you're into that, go for it. Write a simple positive affirmation that can help. I'm confident. I'm full of wisdom. I'm strong. All I need is within me right now. You can create them yourself, or you can search the internet for powerful positive affirmations that others use or recommend. When we come back, what else you can do to take care of yourself and find joy in your work. This is your host, Danielle Silverman, helping you figure out how to reinvent yourself and your career. Welcome back, everybody. It's Danielle Silverman here on Reinventing-U. We are talking today about going back to basics to stay healthy and avoid burnout. And I realized I started off, giving you so much information, like drinking from a fire hose, without telling you where we were going. So the first part we spent talking about going back to basics in order to stay healthy. And then once you are healthy, the question is, how do you reinvent your work when you're stuck in a job that doesn't satisfy you? So the first question that I asked was, what does it mean to you to live a life, to reinvent yourself and live life your way? And what I'm suggesting is that one way to figure that out is to stay healthy. So the second question is, how do you reinvent your work when you're stuck in a job that doesn't satisfy you? So the first thing is to make a decision about whether or not you want to stay in your job. It's not always an option to leave. There might be economic considerations. You might have family that you're taking care of. You might need training to go into another field, for example. So these are real considerations. These are things that keep people back. Finances, I can't afford to leave my job. You'd be surprised, though, when I coach people, that's usually the last thing we talk about. Because if we put that in first, it holds us back from trying to figure out what else we could be doing. So what can you do if you decide that you want to stay in your job? Not because you have to, but because you want to. Let's say you still believe in the company, but it's going through a rough time. You're not being given the opportunity, however, to help or to make a difference. Well, what does it mean to reinvent? Reinvention is about bringing life into a system, whether that system is the organization you work in, whether that system is the community you live in, whether that system is yourself. You are, as a human being, you're a system with, all kinds of other systems within that, physiological symptoms that are within that. Physiological, emotional, and logical systems that are in there. Bringing life into a system means understanding what works and what doesn't work. That means, and I'll speak about this at some point, keeping what's working and not keeping what isn't working. So having that awareness that you need to get rid of some things because they're just not working for you. What would you need to reinvent? Or I should say, why would you need to reinvent? Well, I think for that, you need to understand the world of work today. Back in the 1950s, the life cycle of an organization was about 75 years. So you see on the slide in front of you, you see a life cycle, and the first one says 75 years. And that means that an organization lived that long. And it could, if a new competitor came into the marketplace, it could turn around. But it had, up until the peak, which was 37 and a half years, It had time to do that. It had time to turn around before an eventual decline. And it had time to start a new curve and a new cycle, okay, of reinvention. And that's why people worked in organizations for 30, 35 years and got the gold watch at the end of it. Because the organization was there for a long time. It was solid. And your job was solid. In 2008, some researchers did a study to figure out what would be the life cycle of organizations in 2008. And that number they discovered was 15. That's 2008. There is research, current research, that shows that the median life cycle of an organization today is 6 years. And if you look at this second slide that I'm putting up, this is the most recent research that has been done. And you'll see that the large percentage of organizations that say that they need to reinvent every 1 year or every 2 years. Now, it depends on the industry. There are some industries that are much slower. The tech industry, on the contrary, works much faster. Because you have to, and that implies that as an employee, as a worker, as somebody working in that industry, you have to adapt and you have to learn new things. If you're working in technology, there's no doubt that there's new technologies coming out every single day. And if you're working in that field, you have to keep up with those technologies. You have to reinvent yourself over and over and over again. And if you look at, hold on, let me, so that's what you do, right? If you're working in that particular industry. What is interesting is looking at how the world was and how it will be. That's the difference. So if we went from a life cycle of 75 years to a median life cycle today of 6 years, and sometimes in different industries, much, much shorter than that, what does the future hold? So in slide number 3, what we have is what the world was once upon a time and what the world is going to be. And these are very interesting things for you to remember. So how it was, we had to reinvent, say, every 20 to 40 years in order to survive. Today, we need to reinvent every 2 to 3 years. So you need to think about what your skills are. Who are you? What you want? What is serving you? What is not serving you? The second one I love. What it was perfection. Over a 75-year life cycle, we had time to perfect products and services. And people became perfectionists. People became perfectionists. And most people that I speak with today, they claim they're perfectionists. And I believe them. Everything has to be perfect. It's a disease almost. But what it is today is speed to market. We cannot afford to be perfectionists because if we don't hurry up and bring something to market, our competitor will. Think of software. Think of software. They put out beta software to test the market and see what if it's working. It's not perfect. It's got bugs in it, but it's got to come out, right? Okay, it's got to come out. What are some of the steps that you need to take in order to reinvent yourself? I didn't go through the whole chart, did I? Okay, let's go back to it. One career. Those days when your parents stayed in the same company for 30 years. One career. Today, we see many careers, and often they're simultaneous. Not unheard of to have 5 careers in your lifetime. I'm on my 6th. Or is it 8th? I don't remember. But often they're simultaneous as well. You're doing more than one thing at a time, often because you have many interests, and that's okay too. Once upon a time, we talked about narrow specialization. It was very important to be very, very specific and very specialized. Today, that doesn't work anymore. We look at cross-functional competence, what we call a T. It has to be very deep and very wide, cross-functional. Once upon a time, we talked about products and services. Today, we talk about solutions. We talk about experiences. Once upon a time, we talked about competition, and unfortunately, many people are still talking about competition. But what works today and what will work today is co-opetition, which means you're cooperating with your competition. Competition is not a dirty word. It's not a bad thing. It's about cooperation. It's about making sure that we are serving humanity in the best way possible. And that's co-opetition. And the last thing is to recognize that once upon a time, we thought change was a bug. We hated change. What we need to do today is look at change as a feature, something that we embrace and that we continue to embrace because it's not going away, ever. So what do? How do we take steps to reinvent oneself, ourselves? Well, the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is resilience. Sure, leaders need to work on how to make an organization resilient, but you as an individual also need to work on your personal resilience. Because when people are broken, the organization is broken too. So it stands to reason that when you become more resilient, then the organization in turn will be more resilient. But it takes both things to happen in order for the organization to survive. But my purpose today is to talk to you about how you personally can build your own resistance, your own resilience. I keep mixing those two words, your own resilience, so that you can withstand whatever is happening to you without going into burnout. And that can sometimes be a very lonely and difficult task. So we're going to take it one step at a time. So what exactly is resilience? In their book, Resilience, it's not about bouncing back, how leaders and organizations can build resilience before disruption hits. The authors, Jennifer Eggers and Cynthia Barlow, define resilience as moving forward more energized, elevated, and equipped for what's next. They also point out that resilience is not the same thing as coping. Coping implies that you're doing whatever you need to do in the moment to get over a difficult situation, but it isn't going to help you in the long term. And if you're coping, it's already too late to begin to build resilience. When we truly build resilience, coping becomes less of a need. Another possible way of looking at resilience could be the serenity prayer, which many, many different people know, or you may have heard. It goes like this: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Most definitions of resilience talk about the ability to bounce back after a traumatic event, an illness, an accident, a job loss, the loss of a loved one. It's a definition that's been contested over time. However, most researchers agree that the bounce ability factor is not always a valid metaphor. If you've ever tried to bounce a ball, you know that it doesn't always come back as high as it was originally. One of the foremost writers on resilience is Diane Coutu, and she defines 3 characteristics of resilient people. 1 or 2 of these qualities make it possible to bounce back from hardship, but true resilience requires all 3. The first characteristic is the capacity to accept reality. So in looking hard at reality, we prepare ourselves to act in ways that allow us to endure and survive hardships. Think of Viktor Frankl, who survived the German concentration camps of World War II and became a well-known psychoanalyst and the author of the famous book, Man's Search for Meaning. It's not about idealism or optimism. In other words, believing against all odds that all will be well if we only wait things out. It's not about ignoring what's going on, because that's hiding from reality by denying it. Facing reality means we train ourselves how to survive before we ever have to do so. Secondly, resilient people, look for meaning in some aspects of life. Not just what is my purpose here on earth, but meaning in every action that you take, every decision or choice that you make. Because meaning will inevitably lead us to values, and they're the building blocks of what makes us tick, the glue that holds us together. And the third characteristic of resilience is the ability to improvise. It's about thinking fast on your feet, the ability to solve problems in the moment. What makes a good hockey player, say, skating on the ice, decide to turn in one direction rather than another? Other than the obvious fact that he's studied different plays, that he works out on a regular basis, that he's studied the players on the opposing team and their usual plays, there's always the unknown factor of what will happen in the moment. And the best player, the most resilient one, will look for the opportunities to improvise. So something different from what was expected in order to put the puck into the back of the net. I'm sure there's a perfectly good football analogy here as well, but I'm from Canada, so I talk about hockey. Resilience is something that's built over time. It acknowledges the fact that life is sometimes hard, and we're all going to be knocked down at sometimes or fail. But these are challenges that will prompt us to get back up again, stronger and better for the experience. And you know what? Resilience can be taught. Eggers and Barlow add the following quote, I quote, "Building resilience involves intentional preparation to increase the ability to emerge from challenges better equipped to deal with the next. This is not a return to the former state of mind or to the past. It's a transformation into a stronger self so that the next time disruption hits, one will be better prepared." Being intentional means that you need to stop and think before you react to a situation. When you're faced with a situation that's difficult for you, that triggers something in you, the first reaction is to resist. I know some people who, no matter what, their first reaction is to say no. So our emotions kick in, and we react in ways that are sometimes inappropriate. Someday I'll talk to you about the fight or flight syndrome in Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor's 90 Seconds. People who have a highly developed resilience also have a highly developed emotional intelligence. They recognize the emotions when they arise, and they're capable of making the decision to pause before responding. That's really important. So instead of reacting with resistance, which eventually leads to resentment and then a desire for revenge, well, the resilient person stops. And then decides to take action in a different way, with purpose, accepting what is and creatively finding a solution, preferably with the other person's input. So one is a creative way of doing things, and the other is a reactive way of doing things. So before you say anything, just take a pause. Again, according to Eggers and Barlow, resilience is a result of three things: mindset, choices, and core beliefs. These three pillars of resilience imply that you need to understand your filters, your responses. What are the assumptions that you make? Your attitudes towards things, towards people, towards situations, your opinions. What do you like or you don't like? What are your beliefs? What do you know? What do you think you know to be true about the world and your place in it? Stay authentic to your true self, which of course implies self-knowledge and self-awareness. Break free from your comfort zone. That's a tough one sometimes. But if you're going to reinvent, if you're going to stay resilient, you need to think about, okay, am I in my comfort zone here? Yeah, I need to break out of it, and it'll help me. learn, help me grow. Break free of guilt and resentment is another one. I once had coffee with a friend of mine and told her about an experience I had at school 10 years previously and how bitter I was about that. And she said to me, Danielle, get over it. It was 10 years ago. She was right. As I said before, adopt healthy habits. You can also surround yourself with the right people, ask for support. Above all, celebrate your successes. Celebrate your successes, something we don't often do. So we talked about returning to basics to take care of yourself. We talked about how to reinvent your work when you're stuck in a job that doesn't satisfy you. And that's about building resilience, first and foremost, which is also about taking care of yourself. And when we come back in the next podcast, I'm going to talk about what it means to love your job, to find a job that you fall in love with, and to fall in love with your job, and what it means and the implications for you. And also how you can communicate what you think needs to change. So, in conclusion, adopt a positive mindset, stay healthy, build resilience, and celebrate even the smallest of wins. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to Reinventing-U with me, your host, Danielle Silverman. Tune in on the second and fourth Monday each month at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific on transformationtalkradio.com. Join me and feel inspired and optimistic about your future. We only get one life, so embrace change and thrive with me. Find work that aligns best with your soul and what you enjoy. For more information, go to reinventingu.com.